Hey Eric, how's it going?
I'm having challenges with my mute button this morning. But otherwise, I'm just tired. How are you?
Good, good. Both of those things seem to apply to me, yes.
Oh.
Oh man. Mhm. It's funny, last night I got a little worried because we didn't have any like PRs to work on this call. And I kept thinking, okay, I'm either letting the team down by not doing something to make it so we have a concrete agenda. And then I realized, wait, I'm laying the team down because we need to go through our backlog of issues. So then this morning I started going through the backlog of issues and we found a whole bunch of things to work on. And then Clemens decided to open up 2 new issues for new features. So we now have a ton of things to talk about. So
Cool. Yeah, I saw your ping on there.
yeah,
It seems to relate to something we were recently discussing.
yeah. So all right. Hey Tommy,
Hello.
you're not Tommy. Yeah, I heard that. I heard the
Sorry.
yo. That's okay. I heard the yo in there, so that's all I needed. And hey Clemens.
Hi, Doug.
So Clemens, I don't know if you noticed, I put your 2 new issues on the agenda today because I thought you might want to talk about those, right?
Okay. I'm in a bit of a noisy place, so sorry about that.
Well, no, well, if you want, we can defer those till next
No,
week.
no, it's fine. No,
Okay.
I'm just announcing that I'm in a noisy place.
Okay, sounds good. Hi,
Hey, Doug.
Christoph. Hello, how's it going?
Good.
Good.
I just saw Clemens opened an issue I don't get.
Well, that's good because
That piques my interest. So
yes. Well, I did warn him that he's on the agenda, so he gets to talk about it. Yes. I haven't actually had a chance to read his new issues yet, so I'm sure it's exciting. Hi, Manuel.
Hi.
It's weird. Last couple of weeks, we've been getting less and less people. I don't know what to make of that.
It's summer.
I guess. Yeah.
Progress has been a little slow.
Yeah. Hey, Klaus.
Hey, Doc.
All right, give it 30 seconds or so, then we'll get started.
Maybe a random question.
Mhm.
So how do you see the adoption of cloud events coming along? Like especially for Clemens, for example. So you have a product that's running. Do you see more and more people using it, or how is that going?
We have more products using it. We have the web. Sorry for the noise here, but
No worries.
I hope you can understand me. We have a product called Web PubSub, which is also now using cloud events, which is for letting applications that are talking to websites, like client applications, talk to each other, like chat rooms and stock tickers and all of this. So that's using cloud events too, and so it's coming on more and more. But these all of these conventions and standards take a few years to take hold. So I'm very patient, and adoption will take its time. So we're getting more and more traction.
Yeah, well, from your customers, I mean, for I think EventGrid, they have a choice, right? They can choose cloud events, but they don't have to. Do you track that?
We haven't really looked because we're switching the default on them, and we also switch the documentation around. But again, that's all. If a customer has code that's committed to one format, then it's going to take a while until they switch over to the new format. And again, this might take years. So I'm not worried about it. But we're committed to cloud events. As far as that's the primary format for events, and we have the Azure SDKs also for Serverless Bus and for Event Hubs are also going to pick up the cloud events as a format to go and send as first class effectively.
Cool. And
so again,
not that,
product cycles.
Yeah. And not that you asked, Christoph, but it's taken some time, but within IBM, we are definitely picking it up. And one of the key products that's being worked on right now for the IBM Cloud is going to have cloud events or going to use cloud events as part of its messaging in there. So we're picking it up as well.
Cool.
Yep. Okay, so with that, hey, Scott.
Morning.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Just a reminder, Clemens, I know you open up PRs and stuff, but just don't forget about the other AIs that you have in your backlog. And
sorry.
No, not a big deal. Community time, anything from the community people want to bring up? Probably not. Okay, so this week is supposed to be SDK. Last time I checked, there was nothing on the agenda, but I'll double check. But if nothing's there before the end of this call, then obviously we'll cancel. Just a quick reminder, try to work on your interop stuff. I feel like that's going to be the biggest driver in terms of us trying to get the spec completed. So please, if you can, if you signed up to do an endpoint or an implementation, please let us know when you're ready to actually start doing some serious testing. Because until we have that, I don't think we're going to make a whole lot more progress here, and it feels like we're slowing down quite a bit. Okay, nothing having to do with KubeCon. Timur's not on the call. So there actually are no open PRs for us to look at. All the ones that are out there or need some kind of updates. So what I thought we'd do today is go through at least some of the backlog of issues. And Clemens did open up 2 new issues just a few hours ago, so we will talk about those. But I wanted to at least maybe address these first 2 issues because I thought maybe we can close these ones fairly quickly or deal with these fairly quickly. This one was opened up, I guess, just yesterday, where this person's basically asking whether we should use JSON API format. Now, I don't know much about it, but I think what he was basically suggesting is to define or to use a different format in cloud events for how the data appears inside the body, right? So rather than everything from the cloud events attributes appearing as top level attributes in JSON, rather they get put into some sort of metadata section.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
Thank
no.
you.
Yeah, so I basically replied back, basically saying, yeah, no. But I wanted to hear from anybody else in the group to see whether this is something we want to consider for version 2 or not, because obviously we're not going to change version 1, and I don't think this is a big enough reason to introduce a version 2. But do we want to keep this open for version 2 at all? Because I'm inclined to say no, but I didn't.
No.
Okay, Clement says no. Anybody else? Or anybody think I'm misinterpreting what this guy's looking for?
I will have a quick look at my gut feeling is no as well, but I think I want to read the read the issue very briefly first.
Okay, I will definitely wait until at least later tonight to think about closing it. But as of right now, I'm hearing the general consensus appears to be close it. Is that true? Anybody want to speak up against that proposal?
I think he's missing a bit the context of sorry, a protocol. So that would be sort of a new protocol if I get it right. But I don't really see us having a need for multiple JSON protocols. So
some person comes up with yet another JavaScript library. That's what that looks like.
yeah, exactly. So if that becomes a super huge JSON standard and millions supported, then maybe it makes sense. But yeah.
Okay. So I'll tell you what, let me do this. Approve to close, but we'll wait until end of day. Okay. Thank you all. Next one, hopefully this is easy. So this person pointed out that in the intro of the webhook specification, there's a 404 link in there. Now the link, here, let me show you what it is. The link just basically points to an article that talks about what are webhooks basically. Okay. Now click on it and obviously you get a 404. So what I was wondering was, and Clement, since you wrote the doc, I directed the question to you, is should we just point to something generic like the webhook thing in Wikipedia?
Oh, yeah, I know what, yeah. That is really unfortunate that that broke. Yeah, we probably should.
Okay, is there a better place you
I
could
mean,
think of?
That was just trying to give credit. If the blog is gone, then we can probably go and just delete the link.
Okay. Do you want to take a little time to see if you can find it? Because I did do a quick Google search and I couldn't find it, but maybe I had the wrong search criteria. Do you want to wait a little while for you to double check before I just remove the link?
I think it's okay to remove the link. That was I know who proposed it. That was Glenn Block, who was here for a while, and he found it appropriate to credit the person who apparently coined the term first. But if that person's blog is gone, then they probably don't care as much. So
okay. Any
I think
disagreement?
that's just what it is.
I've found a copy of the blog post on GitHub. I'll paste the link into the chat.
Ooh,
okay,
cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oops. This one?
Yeah. So if you look at the link, that basically is the link that we've got, but with github.com in front.
Is there any way to get to the nice
Is it
readable
published
version?
here?
Oh.
Ah.
There we go. Ah, okay, cool. Thank you, Lou. I'll just take that then.
Fantastic. So we should go and just fix that.
Okay. Dang, found it. Cool. Thank you, Lou. Much nicer. Okay, so where is it? Cool. Excellent. Okay, let me start closing some things here. All right, Clemens, your first issue is announcements. Would you like to talk to this one?
Yes. Well, I think I wrote what I. Sorry. I think I wrote what I wanted to say, but I'm going to say this in other words. So the discovery service right now only has effectively a pull interface or a read interface, right? Where you're allowing a caller or a discoverer, as I call it in this write-up, to effectively find out what services exist. Now we're finding in the scenario that Klaus and I are working on, we're effectively bridging two eventing infrastructures, and the applications sit at the outer edges of those infrastructures, and they need to go and talk to effectively two sets of middlewares which work differently. And which means that even like configuring the way how we thought about this for discovery initially was, you're going to configure the services that are being returned by the discovery service. You're going to configure those in some proprietary way, and then you have a way to go and get at them. What we're finding is that if you have a custom application that lives over in SAP, in SAP's platform, you can build applications there. And so you build a custom app, and the custom app now is able to raise events. And then you have an application that sits over in Azure, and you want to call an Azure function that is being triggered by that event that has been raised in SAP. Then the person who's setting up the Azure function needs to be able to set up that subscription in some way. So they need to know that those events are available, so that the events are available, and then also which events in particular are available. So the information that's effectively contained in the service object that we have in the discovery spec. So what we and we've been discussing this for 2 months now, far too long with too much time. And so effectively what we came up with is this notion of announcement, where you already have a channel that's established, and I'm talking about the channel in the second issue between those two platforms. Effectively, we're taking these two super brokers, if you will, so EventGrid and the SAP Event Bus, and we're hooking them up, kind of region by region. So let's say West Europe, and then if the application that's living over in SAP or an application that sits in Azure, so this works in either direction, is ready to start publishing events, it will make it known that it is publishing events, which means it's going to publish in form of an event the service object. So the service object that you get when you enumerate on discovery, that exact service object is being published, and where you're effectively announcing, hey, I'm now online, and I'm able to publish the following events. I will make those available, and you can go and subscribe to them, and basically sends that out as an event. And then there's discovery services. The discovery service can now go and get that event, the discovery service on the other side, and then can go and republish that to whoever wants to subscribe. And so they can then go and enumerate all the events that are available. So that is what this mechanism is, effectively allowing a publisher to tell the platform, to tell the intermediary, effectively to tell the discovery service, here's what I'm offering. So basically to recap, we have thought we are keeping the publishing part of the discovery service private or proprietary, but we've now landed on the conclusion that we have to have a common interface to go and effectively fill the service list of the discovery service.
So it's interesting you call this. Oh, does anyone else want to speak up? Okay.
So I think this is kind of what when I was making the prototype, I realized that I needed to be able to subscribe to the discovery service updates for the catalog changes. I have yet to document that because I'm bad.
That is effectively what this ends up. So the mechanism will also support that. Effectively, you have because all those discovery services need to be chainable. But where it originates is at the publisher. The publisher comes online, whatever that means, right? There's an initial act of telling your downstream middleware, hey, I'm going to go and publish events. It basically is the logical first operation before you start pushing events.
Yeah,
That
I
says,
like this. This is cool.
right? And
Yeah,
you say,
so yeah, at one point we did talk about something like this, because remember I'd opened up a PR or an issue, we're talking about how do I do like a mass import of things to populate the discovery endpoint. And I think everybody at that point, as you said, we said, let's get that proprietary for right now. But the one thing I want to make sure that I understand this, because you, excuse me, you use the term announcements as opposed
Yes.
to something like, how do you populate the discovery endpoint, or how do you do a create to the discovery endpoint? How do you register? Did you just use the word announcement because it just happened to pop in your head, or are you differentiating announcements from the act of like registering with the discovery endpoint? Is it just a terminology thing, or is there a real semantic difference?
I think this is it's a capability that composes with a discovery service, but it stands for itself, because you can. So think about a peer-to-peer relationship, where you have you simply have like what you do with webhooks today, right? The way how webhooks commonly work is you have some documentation and there's a URL that you get to see, and then you go and put the URL somewhere, and then you have effectively a direct end-to-end relationship without any middleware involved. So the announcements would be you establish an event channel between two peers, the publisher and a receiver. And if the publisher changes its mind about what events are available, it can send over that same channel. It can send announcements as events and say, hey, I have an extra event here, an extra event type, or I no longer have this event type because we revoked the rights for you to go and get that event.
Oh, I see. Okay, so even though it's ending up with the same semantic result, you use the word announcement to make it clear that this isn't like a, hey, register API. This is more like you want to define what the event looks like to say, I'm now going to spit out events of this type. And that the result of that to a discovery endpoint is, yes, it's creating a register type of operation.
Correct.
But on the wire, it looks like an event. Now I understand why you chose that word.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
perfect.
So the discovery API will get an endpoint which will understand these announcements, but you can use those announcements without having the discovery service.
Gotcha. Yep.
Right? That's the point of why I want to call this. It's not the discovery register, this thing API, but it's a more general mechanism.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. I think an interesting way to make this happen, my idea was you get the discovery service able to be subscribable with the subscription API that we're doing. And so then the service that hosts the discovery API has its own set of events that it natively emits. And it's kind of cute because, it's hosting its own API that it can provide for you. And that implementation can choose the scope of how, like what the catalog updates should be, and maybe it changes it based on the subscriber. Maybe you don't need to know everything.
That is for the discovery service. That's true, and that is the nice composability here. If you start at the edge, if you start at the publisher basically we currently have no mechanism for just an app, right? A thing that you write in code and you put somewhere. We currently don't have a mechanism for that app that you write and deploy to say to an external party, by the way, I have these following events, I'm going to send them to you. And here's the metadata for them. So there's currently no mechanism. So that's what that does. And then ideally, you feed that into a discovery service, which will then remember them.
Right, but so let me ask you a question about that, because I think Scott is talking about a scenario where you almost have like a subscription going, or you have a subscription between two discovery endpoints, and so they kind of but this application case that you were talking about, it's not like there's a permanent subscription or connection of some kind. It's just, hey, a random app popped up. He needs to send an event to the discovery endpoint to let them know he's going to start sending events to it. So while what's on the wire may look like an event, the act of sending that event to the discovery endpoint isn't so much because of a subscribe operation.
Correct.
it may be more of a one-time push operation kind of thing. Do I have that right?
But yeah, that is correct, but that it's one of the this is one of those if you squint cases where yes, there is a subscription because somehow that application developer knows the endpoint that they sent to, so someone told them that,
True.
and that the act of telling them that is subscribing.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Okay. If you squint hard enough, I guess maybe.
Exactly. That's what I meant.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. But I like the idea. I like the idea of resurrecting the idea of a mechanism to populate the discovery endpoint from an interoperability perspective. And I think it's really cool to treat that as an event. And you know how you set up the flow is a different topic. But I like the idea of using eventing for that. That's cool.
Yeah. So I put this as a requirement because we're still a little hand wavy about the detail. I mean, we need to have an event, we need to have an endpoint, so it's clear. There are still some hand wavy aspects to it, and then we haven't written the spec yet. So I just want to make sure that we capture the fact that we need to have a spec for this.
Okay. Klaus, is there anything you wanted to speak about relative to this? Because I know it's from you and Clemens.
Yes, but no, Clemens presented it nicely, so nothing to add at this point.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions, comments, concerns with going this direction so that maybe you want to try to kill the entire idea so they don't waste their time? Anybody want to speak up? Okay.
I would just say,
any.
let's make it, make sure that it is subscription API compatible and possibly optional.
Yeah, all of that is optional, yes.
Okay, cool. Last chance, any questions or comments? All right, cool. Sounds like an interesting idea.
This is also really fun because if the API we describe is only cloud events, it can be over any protocol that we want.
That is correct.
The power of cloud events, right?
We're just getting started. It's still day one. Oh no, sorry, that's not us.
Okay, cool. All right, let's talk about the next one. Cross-tenant channels.
So that is something that's a little more special. So I'm going to say this in different words because I wanted to write this down in a fairly dense, compact way. So Klaus has an event bus, and we have an event bus. And those event buses are fairly complex beasts. And then we both have the same problem, but in different ways. So in Klaus world, there are what's called zones and applications, and there's different tenant contexts. And we have a notion in Azure where we have a subscription and then also a what we call a resource group. So we also have different tenant concepts. And those tenant concepts are very different. Some like even the criteria by which you call someone a tenant is different. And what's also common is that we have a universe of identity and access control, and SAP has a universe of identity and access control, and that is true for everybody, right? IBM has a different one, and Google has a different one, and AWS has a different one. Everybody kind of has their notion of identity, and then to make things even worse, if you look at the tenant models inside of those cloud platforms, you have these isolation. You have tenant isolation in a way that even the identity scopes, which means the directories, in our case in Azure, are incompatible. So which means that a customer who is an Azure tenant, company A, and another company, company B, who's also an Azure tenant, their identity systems are incompatible with each other, which means company A cannot talk to resources of company B without there being some complex bridging, etc. And that is because we want to keep all those tenants separate. That's causing all kinds of interesting problems here in just trying to make events flow, not only from the security perspective, but also just purely from the notion of who is your tenant, and who do we route to. So we've been having, I think we've been stuck on this for like 2 months, like with lack of clarity on how we should go and map those things. So and this is what we came up with. At the heart, we are saying that if you have a multi-tenant system on the left and you have a multi-tenant system on the right, you need to accomplish 2 things. First of all, you need to have a bridge between the concept of tenants, and then you need to have some sort of acknowledging and dealing with the fact that the identity and access control systems are completely different, which means you need to have a trust, some way of establishing trust between the system level, if you will. You know, the thing, like, you have under the covers Azure and the SAP system that we're dealing with in this particular setup. The tenants are something that sits on top of those systems, and that's something that is magic that we do with effectively database lookup tables in the end. So the customer experience kind of sits on top, and that happens kind of in these virtually isolated spaces. But under the bottom, that's all the same kind of infrastructure. So there is an SAP and Azure dial tone level, and that's where the events flow in either direction. But then as the events pop out, the events that are flowing through this common consolidated bus must then pop back out into these tenant scopes. And so now the question is, how do you make it happen that customer Contoso, who is both an SAP customer and an Azure customer, but the SAP system doesn't know about, the SAP system has no concept of what it means to be an Azure customer, and the Azure system has no concept of what it means to be an SAP customer, right? Only Contoso knows that they're paying both companies lots of money, and they have accounts in both systems, but they don't know. But they're the only party which actually has a notion of this thing over here is the same is me over there. So what we need to able to do is we need to able to create a bridge between the tenant concept Contoso SAP and the tenant concept Contoso in Azure. So the way we're thinking about this is we're creating a neutral channel that maps so SAP maps their tenant identifiers to that channel ID, and then on our side, on the Azure side, we map the channel ID to our tenant concept. So it's effectively initially just a neutral identifier, and this neutral identifier is then mapped to the respective tenant concept on both sides. What that channel identifier now allows is that at the gateway, where the events are ingested into the respective other system, the SAP system will send to Azure using that channel ID, and we will send to SAP also using that channel ID. And at the gateway, there's simply an annotation that happens on the transport message. May that be an MQP message, may that be an HTTP request. So it's happening effectively on the transport headers. So it doesn't need to be inside the cloud event. It doesn't pollute the cloud event. And so the gateway then will go and take a look at the request and say, oh, so this is channel ID XYZ that maps to my internal tenant, and now can go and route this into the appropriate right place. So it's in the first place, this notion of a tenant channel is an identifier. And then in the second place, it's also establishing trust. And that is the platforms. So we're calling it platform A, platform B, or as I just explained it with company names, SAP and Azure. The platform, there's a problem here, a security problem here, that for me as Azure, so as offering broad platform services in Azure, there's always a chance that not all of my subscribers are trustworthy, right? It's possible that someone shows up with a stolen credit card and then just creates an Azure subscription for a little while until we catch them, but they now have an Azure subscription and they can go and do things. And of course, we want to go and protect, in that case, then our customer, SAP, from that party being able to use their resources in any way. So the notion is that as we create this trust relationship, there's a base trust between those two platforms, right? There's some resources that are kind of putting those two event buses together. But then as a SAP customer says, I want to go and I want to send events to Azure, they will cause the SAP platform to say, I want to create a cross-tenant channel. And then they will create that channel mapping and they will register that channel mapping of their tenant to us. That channel mapping is then being created effectively in our platform. And in our platform, we're going to go and put this channel into the Azure subscription of this designated customer. But the customer, of course, SAP does this effectively without authorization, right? They just get an identifier of the subscription, but we trust them, so we're assuming that they're doing the right thing. But the owner of the Azure subscription still must accept the fact that they are getting events from SAP and are probably also sending events back to SAP. So there's an act of offering up events and there's an act of accepting the fact that you're offering up events. And once you've done those two acts, that's when that channel is being established. And that creates now a trusted route where you have two levels of trust. You have a level of trust between the two platforms. SAP can go and send to Azure and Azure can send to SAP as a consolidated stream. And now we have a way to go and with the channel ID, we can go and demultiplex that stream, by using the channel ID in either direction. And then for these communication links from this global scope into the respective tenant subscriptions through this offering and accept handshake, we also have a trust relationship from the platform into the platform tenant. So that is what that is for. That might be a little overwhelming, but it's required.
So Klaus, you're unmuted. You want to speak?
Sometimes as a very simplified example, I'd like to compare it to pairing your Bluetooth, your phone via Bluetooth with your car. So that you also have to acknowledge at the other end. And so here it would just, yeah. Or where I've seen it recently is also Slack. So they now provide this feature Slack Connect, where you can create a shared channel between two different Slack workspaces, even of different companies. And it's also done by initiating it and acknowledging it at the other end.
Okay. Oh, Christoph, did you want to speak to this? Because I know you had some questions in the issue itself.
Yeah, maybe you can scroll down to my comment.
Yep.
So I'm not sure I'm following because I think it's kind of what is happening today. So I picked out our example event here, which has the source of GitHub/cloud events/spec. So in this case, we can discuss if cloud events or cloud events/spec is the tenant, but a discussion for another day. And then let's say I want to connect this to an Azure function. Then I create an Azure function and I have to give it a name. So, or a namespace, I guess, whatever it's called in Azure, sorry, which I would here pick cloud event spec and I have to give the webhook also a name. So maybe cloud event spec is basically my tenant on Azure, right?
Yeah, that's yeah. You're missing one piece here. in the tenant models that we're talking about, you have an entire directory of people, effectively a closed shop directory of people which are acting on behalf of that tenant. This is a user model here, more or less, and that there are rules too, but it's not the same thing. Also, we need to have a mechanism on how we can. You're still, if you're sending an event to a webhook from GitHub, you're still acting as yourself, or you're providing some credentials that are then able to call that webhook. That's something that we need to effectively make this such that the platform will go and accept those events, will route them to the other end, but then the access control on those events is actually happening over on the other side using the access control system of the other side. So this is more complicated.
So for me, that is defined then in the protocol. So for example, in our webhook spec, we have a way of already defining a handshake, right? Or
that is very different. The subscription manager, you publish an event into a foreign system, and the subscription manager is in that foreign system, and all the access control rules and the identities that are managed by those access control rules only exist in that foreign system. Like, you don't even know.
Yeah, so maybe one step back. So is this part of the cloud event spec itself, or is this part of the subscription API spec?
We were not sure yet, but that's probably even a different spec.
Okay.
We just know that we need it, and we need it in a way that it's neutral, and it's not something that we do as a proprietary thing between ourselves.
That was actually going to be my question. Is, one is, are you looking to do something as simple as you want to standardize some sort of new attribute in the event, or you want a whole new spec to define some sort of handshake? And the other thing that kind of was running through my mind is why isn't this kind of out of scope for us? Because we've purposely kind of avoided things like security, tenants, and stuff like that. And so it would help me if we can get a little more concrete in terms of what the exact thing is you're proposing, whether it's a new spec or just a new attribute someplace.
It's going to be the reason why this needs to be here is that it will change the wire footprint for the transport bindings. So there will be a channel identifier, and the channel identifier needs to be injected into the HTTP, into the MQP messages, effectively it's a hop-to-hop annotation, if you will. We need to multiplex and demultiplex. That's at the heart of it.
But I still don't get why you need that.
You don't have the problem. We have the problem.
Why do I not have the problem? I also have multiple tenants, and I also need to send that to what you have. So
yeah, but what we have is we need to tunnel from one tenant to another tenant in a completely different identity realm, and the source tenant and the receiver, the concepts are different, the identifiers of those tenants are different, and so they can't know of each other because there's concept mismatch, and they don't have the same they don't have the same identity system, which means we need to have some intermediary between them. There is no communication path between those two parties, right? We need to assume that both of those, that the publisher as well as the subscriber live in isolated VNets, and they can't see each other. They don't know about each other, which means they need to have all that middleware in the middle. So it's not like GitHub publishing to a webhook, because that webhook is likely 4 hops away and in a hidden environment.
So Clemens, let me make sure I understand this, and by really dumbing this down for me to understand. It sounds like what you're saying is you have one system that's sending out an event, and for lack of a better phrase, it has some sort of tenant ID as an HTTP header. The receiving system receives the event. It knows nothing about that tenant ID, at least as that current string. It needs to map it into a tenant ID that it understands. So it takes the tenant ID, looks up in a table, maps it to the real value, sticks that new tenant ID on the event, and then passes it along. And now the receiving system can now understand it because it has the right tenant ID. Do I have that right so far?
Yes, except that each of those, both of those communicating systems do the work of effectively eliminating their mapping their tenant concept onto this neutral channel ID as they're passing the messages over to the other system. So each system kind of does its mapping to that neutral ID on its send side.
Okay, yeah, so you're right, it's slightly different, yeah. So before the sender sends it out by the ID he wants to talk about it as, he first maps it to a generic ID, and then the receiving side converts it from generic to specific. Okay.
Correct.
Now, so thank you for clarifying. Now, can I go back to why is this a cloud event problem as opposed to some sort of other specification integration layer thingy that sits on that may leverage us, but why is it a cloud event problem?
Because we needed to go and make cloud events flow, and because we're effectively we're annotating the cloud events transfers that we're sending across. Like this channel ID that we're putting onto this HTTP request, and we haven't decided where we're going to put this URL or into an HTTP header or in a message annotation MQP. Wherever we're going to put it, those are messages which are carrying cloud events.
Right. So that's why I was kind of trying to figure out what you're proposing, whether it's a spec or an attribute, because part of me thinks that the solution here might be from the cloud events perspective to say, okay, do we want to consider a well-defined extension called tenant ID or tenant channel, something like that? But wait, let me finish. But then how that gets populated or how it gets used on the sending and receiving side would be an implementation detail.
But it's not a cloud event. It's not a cloud events attribute. It's a transport attribute because we don't want to go and pollute the event with information that is only used literally for that transition from one system to the next system. It's like if there's a case for a delivery annotation in MQP, we have those. It's that, right? It's like for that one exact hop, you are neutralizing. You're creating you're using this neutral ID to pass that event over to the other side, so that the other side can go and then use that to find the right chute to go and send that event onto. But we don't want to modify the event because that neutral tenant ID is meaningless to anybody except those two gateways. Nobody else knows about it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
but
I'm still not sure I'm following. So what is it then exactly that you map?
You map a tenant in someone is buying the right to run CRM in the SAP platform, right? So the combination, and in Western Europe. So there's in Western Europe a company Contoso, which is using CRM. That's one tenant. And then I'm just making that up, Klaus. Sorry.
Sure.
And then there is an Azure subscriber that has a resource group, and that resource group is also in Western Europe. So there's a GUID and a string that are identifiers over there. Two totally different things. So when we want to send events specifically from that CRM app to that particular Azure subscription resource group, we need to go and route those. So they go into this consolidated big pipe on the SAP side, are being piped over into Azure with enormous volume. And then on the other side, we're going to look at that stream. We're going to split them back up, and we're going to go and put those events then into the right channel for this particular Azure subscription with a particular resource group. So it's multiplexing from one concept to a big event stream that goes from one system to the next and then gets demultiplexed in a different way on the other side. And the multiplexing, demultiplexing. Okay.
So if I get it correctly, it's basically a performance optimization, because what you want to do is you want to batch events of multiple tenants together.
No. It's not at all performance. It has nothing to do with performance.
Yeah, but you want to have this global event stream on. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
The global event stream exists because the message passing happens between between Azure and the SAP platform acting as themselves.
I'd like to ask a clarifying question. Are you trying to control what tenants on one side are have access to the information based off of configuration on the other side? Is that the problem you're working on?
Which there is a.
Because I thought for a second that you were just talking about how do I take one stream or context of information on one side and make sure that it goes into the correct context or stream on the other side.
That is correct, yes. So yes, you're right. This is the mapping from one scope to the next scope. And that mapping from one scope to the next scope is done without the other party knowing what that scope means.
Sure.
Right. So there's what we need to have is a way that is a neutral way that allows effectively a Contoso, who is a customer of both platforms, to go and create this link between its two tenants, right, into those two platforms, and create an event channel between the two.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if I should tell this little story. When we were looking at how to deal with all y'all in multiple cloud providers, one of the things we conceived was that there needed to be this neutral service that would basically be a translator. There was a lot of question about how do we automatically translate credentials in the midst of network calls and like silly, unproductive things like that. And what we came down to saying is, well, if you're in AWS and you want to call into a resource in GCP or Azure, or pick your source and destination, then what you need to do is you need to reach out to this neutral service, and you need to ask for credentials from the target. And that allows you to act as though you are part of that cloud. So whatever cloud you're in that cloud, you have your credentials there, you use that to reach out to a face of the neutral in the cloud you're existing in. That gives you back the materials you would need to act as though you're in that other cloud. And then you interact with that cloud and its services accordingly. Right, so the way that this translates into the scenario that you're talking about is that there would have to be some rights giving in the target cloud that would then be handed to the source cloud that would allow for that mapping to be set up. Is that reasonable? Is that
yeah, that is. There are echoes here, I would say. We would not allow anybody to go and act as someone else in that way. But there is certainly the trust relationship that we're building here has a very similar effect to what you just described. So there's two trust links in this model. One is between the platforms. So there is a way for us to go and send data into the big pipe over there, and there's from over there there's a way to send messages over to us, and so there's a platform to platform link, and that exists effectively once per region, once per mega data center. That's one link, and that's something that we do kind of as a setup on per deployment. And then the second link is how do you is effectively granting the right to the platform level to pop messages back up into the tenant level. So that you're offering the tenant, hey, I have events for you if you want to. And then the tenant says, yeah, I'm okay to go and accept them, because the platform will basically come up and say, the SAP platform that is a partner of Azure wants to send you events. Is that okay with you? And then you will accept that. And of course, the way how this comes about, this offer, is because you yourself, mostly, right, an administrator, went over to the other platform and made that offer happen. Right? They said they enabled they turned on the switch of publish events into Azure, into the following Azure subscription, and because of that, you're going to see, so you push a button over in SAP, and then you're going to see in Azure, you're going to see in the portal, you're going to see appear an offer to go and create, to finish effectively that relationship building. So that is then in the end, when that relationship has been built and you've accepted this is similar to having the grant to send events, which is conceptually similar to having this credential store that you just talked about. It's just we're creating a permanent, through this consent, offer consent model, which you need to be authorized for, we're creating a permanent channel.
So if I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Christoph.
So if I'm getting correctly, so the first step is that SAP and Azure agree that they will have a link.
Yes.
And only then the customer can agree that they want to send events from SAP to Azure or the other way around. Is that correct?
There's a second layer. There's a second layer when the tenant comes into play.
Yeah. Okay. I think now I get it a bit more, but I think I kind of don't want to have that. I think we should build interoperability where I can send events from SAP to Azure without them. I mean, there may be companies in fight. So let's say, I don't know, I want to migrate from Oracle to SAP, and two customers are in fight, but I want to migrate stuff over. So for some time, I want some Oracle events to flow into my SAP system, so I keep them in sync. Now, those two companies will probably not agree to establish this base platform or this base agreement. So then I can't send events from one to the other. So
yeah, but that's I'm not sure that's true, because the communication channel we're creating here again is between two tenants. We have and with the identities that are sitting in those tenants, right? It is not you sending events. It is some identity, some process identity that exists over in SAP, or some people identity that exists over in the SAP system, one of thousands, that is sending an event, that is sending events, is authorized to send events over to this Azure subscription because of access control rules over in the SAP system. And then we have access control rules over in the Azure system, which then allows some completely different person, based on the identity system that exists over there, to go and subscribe and understand those events. And that's the important thing. So where you have two completely different circles of identities and two different circles of access control rules, and effectively a communication channels which are completely insulated from each other. Like there is no the illusion that exists here is that the SAP system is completely insulated in its own VNet, its own virtual network. No traffic can go in and out. There's no public IP address at all. And the same thing exists in the Azure side. There's no public IP address. Nothing is registered in public DNS. You can't see anything. But still, we need to be able to go and send events from one place to the next place, which means we need to have that tunnel which bridges them. There is nothing public you can go and configure to make the events go to a public endpoint. That's all under the covers. We're funneling through this common bus these common buses which are looking at each other, we're funneling those events through a backplane, which will then go and make those pop up in the infrastructures on the other side.
So just, we are running a little low on time. Obviously, we should continue the discussion in the issue itself, but since we don't have time for any other issue, I guess we could take a couple more questions on this one. And I had one, Clemens. I still feel like I'm missing something here in the puzzle. So let's assume for a minute that you didn't have to have this mapping of identities or tenants or at all, right? So you just had SAP talking to Microsoft system, and there's some sort of tenant ID or authentication stuff that flows on that event, right? Why can't that exact same mechanism be used in this scenario with the change that on the outbound side, it twiddles the authentication ID of who it is to the common one, and on the receiving side, it twiddles it from the common one to the specific one. Why do you need to invent something new?
The publisher doesn't know, and the subscriber doesn't know. The publisher lives in its world, because the publisher is part of the SAP ecosystem, right? And so the publisher thinks it will only publish into the SAP system. So it only knows concepts and notions of sources and etc. All of that stuff within the SAP ecosystem. And then we're creating on the back end, there's configuration that is causing a subset of those events that are being published in that app to be funneled towards Azure. And in Azure, it's similar. You have everything happens within the Azure ecosystem. Everything happens within the Azure subscription, all the rights. And then there's a way to go and create a subscription that then funnels those events towards this SAP bridge. But
right, but it seems to me what you're kind of describing there is there's a piece of middleware that's someplace where, yes, the subscriber and the publisher themselves don't necessarily know about the common tenant ID, but if you put a piece of middleware before and after each one of those respectively, then that middleware can do that translation of the specific tenant ID to the generic ID and then the other direction on the other side.
Yeah.
Why does that need to be? If all are you looking just to standardize the definition and the workings of this piece of middleware?
See, the problem is it's two pieces of middleware that are looking at each other.
Right.
And they need to have the same concept.
Right.
So SAP has an event bus that is routing stuff within SAP, and then there's one extra hop that exists. Like there's one pipe out of that thing, which then pipes over into Azure. And we have exactly the same notion.
Right, but it seems to me that this thing that you need to do of the tenant ID mapping, it sounds like a very useful thing, for sure, but it doesn't sound like it's eventing specific. It sounds like this actually may be useful for any messages that are flowing back, or any messages that are flowing between the two systems, right?
So do you want me to take this to Oasis?
No, I don't know.
I'm happy to.
Maybe, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to sort of, I have two separate concerns here. One is just, do I even understand the problem, right? That's one piece of it. But then the other piece of it is this appropriate for Cloud Event to work on, even if I thought, yes, this is a really cool problem to solve, right? Is this the right forum for it is what I'm trying to figure out. And I don't know the answer to that one yet.
So the reason why I believe this is the right forum for it is because this is the exact same mechanism for all transports that we have. So the alternative for me would be to go and try to do the HTTP thing in the IETF, to try to do the MQP thing and the MQTT thing in Oasis, where I already know that the MQTT thing is not going to happen, and etc. So this is the one place where we have an umbrella across all those protocols, and where we have now two companies in this forum, which are working with each other, trying to get trying to build everything around the set of APIs that we have, and we're finding this particular problem, and we want to go and solve that problem together.
Just to rephrase and possibly change Doug's comment slightly, is there anything about this problem that is specific to cloud events that mean that we are definitely the right body to work on this? I get nervous that there are problems that we need to solve to get discovery and other things sorted, but that are more cross-cutting concerns and should be solved in a more cross-cutting way. Doug, is that anything like the concern you were raising?
Yeah, it's basically the same thing with different words, but yeah, it is. Like I said, I just want to make sure this is the right forum for the discussion.
What other forum do we have?
I don't know. Like you said, Oasis, W3C. I don't know. It feels. I get nervous about the idea of us taking on a task that, yes, you may see because you're sending events, but it's not really it's not really a cloud event specific thing or an event specific thing, right? It's a more generic problem. I don't know how else to say it other than I just want to make sure this is the right forum for it.
I think I don't know much about CNCF organization and politics, as it were, but if there is a broader CNCF body that we could ask, has anyone else been working on this? That I think that would be a useful next step. But as I say, I don't know whether there is anyone appropriate to ask. CNCF feels like the right body.
There's a technical, what is that, technical oversight board or something, but I'm not sure
committee.
How well they are. We're one of the few places which writes specs. And so the other place that writes specs in the CNCF is this special CNCF that is actually in the Linux Foundation. The spec, they have a special spec body where that would be. And so it is a problem of event flow. Right?
But is it a problem specific to events?
Yeah, it's enabling event flow in either direction. It's establishing effectively trust for channels that are made for event flow. I mean, that's the problem we're solving here. We're solving a problem that's specific to knitting our event systems together.
Okay, so let me do something here. Technically, we're over time. Obviously, we're not going to come to any kind of resolution right now. So if anybody needs to go, feel free to go, because we're eating into the SDK call. But because there is no topics for the SDK call, we can at least spend a couple minutes and just wrap this up. So if anybody, feel free to drop if you want to. Just want to put that out there.
I do need to. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye,
so what I'd like to do, Clemens, is I think it would be useful to have a little more specificity around exactly what you'd like. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. I have a comment on Christoph's comment.
Oh, okay.
It's like, so Christoph writes, to me, this is not in the spirit of interoperability. If SAP wants to have interoperability, it should just be able to talk to any CE compatible system, not just the Azure specific one. That is the point of actually writing a spec, is that we want to have a tenancy mapping model that works for everybody. And we're writing this in a way that it's neutral on the left side and the neutral on the right side, and has nothing to do with either system. So SAP can use that tenant mapping model with any other party which supports that model. That's the whole point of us bringing it here. If we want to do proprietary stuff between ourselves, we can perfectly well do this, and we will. But that's not the point of even showing up here with this. The point is that we want to have a mechanism that from our end that doesn't work only with SAP, and from the SAP side that doesn't only work with Azure.
Yeah, we had exactly that discussion, and that's why we are here with this.
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm really, so very concrete example. There's a press release from Commerce Tools that a new customer called Nordic Nest launched like a week ago. So that's public information. What's not public is that they're on Azure, so don't tell anyone. But they send events from us to Azure. So all of that perfectly works in production, and we map the tenant that's on our side that comes with a lot of permissions, and there's like very few people who actually have the permission to set up such an event flow from us to Azure. And on Azure side, I don't know what they've set up, right? So, but for me, this is a soft problem. Because you can't really map those to tenants concept, as you said, they're super abstract. The whole permission schemes on both sides are just not compatible. I don't see what we add by.
Okay, so how about you? So in this issue, please describe how you solved your problem.
Which problem?
What you just described. You just described it's solved in production. So write down the solution.
So they create.
No. Write it down because we're kind of out of time. But
yeah, okay. I can write it down.
I'm curious. I'm really curious how you solve that, because we've been having quite a bit of time of talks with all the security folks involved from both sides, to make sure that we have the bridging of this, and we've been wrangling with this. So if you've solved this in an easier way, we're keen to learn about it, because this is as good as we could make it so far.
Yeah, maybe I just don't understand what security issue you're trying to solve.
Yes, assume that nobody from the credentials and identities of the left side are worthless on the other side and back. And you cannot use any credentials, you cannot use any keys, you cannot use anything. You can only use on either side for publishing or subscribing, you can only use credentials and you can only use identities from that respective side.
Yes. So what you do is, so in our case, you go to Azure, you create the credentials for exactly, so you really create a lockdown credential that the only thing they can do is put an event into that specific queue. You take that, put this into our system, and that's how our system has the permission to do that. Now, obviously, there's the case that you could give it permission to do anything.
But what you just said is you're creating a credential that allows you to reach over to the other side. I'm already saying that is not allowed, because the SAP tenants can't do anything with an Azure resource. They don't know about it. There's nothing that can exist in the SAP system which gives you a right on the Azure resource. Not a key, not an identity, nothing. You can't have that. Those are because.
Is it also true that the event can be sent to more than one person? So you need this common tenant ID to possibly map to different backend systems, and because you have multiple receivers of it as well?
Yes. So the role-based access control on the receiving end is really controlled by the admin of the receiving system. So if Peter and Alice and Joe, right, have different rights to receive SAP events, they will get different role assignments on that topic, and then they will go, and so the control is kind of on the Azure side. You will still get the same event stream, but it will be limited to those consumers on the Azure side of what they can see, because that's something that's gated by the admin on one side of the system.
Right, but I'm not sure I asked the question properly. I'm not sure you answered it. So is this system that you're talking about here, or the coordination that you're talking about here between SAP and Microsoft, is that in your mind only needed when you have one sender and one receiver? Or do you anticipate this also being used, for example, add IBM into the picture, where both IBM and Microsoft are going to be receiving events from SAP, and we need to have a common tenant ID across all three providers?
So we haven't thought about that problem as a one-to-N, but it would work as a one-to-N.
Okay.
The mechanics would have to change, but if there was kind of a triangle relationship where we need to go and negotiate across, we need to understand between three systems that Contoso, right? Contoso has an IBM cloud subscription, and they have an Azure subscription, and they have an SAP subscription, and those three tenant concepts are the same thing. Like we're literally talking about the same concept.
Mm-hmm.
Then they could rendezvous all on that same notion.
Right. And
you could build a chain or a triangle, I guess.
Yeah. And am I correct to assume that I think what you're looking for here is, it would be, I think, not just a definition of how this tenant ID or whatever may appear on the wire, but also it's a specification that defines how the what's the right word I'm looking for, coordination or setup of the tenant ID mapping or how that coordination between the various systems happens, right? Oh, someone needs to create a common tenant ID. How does SAP and Microsoft both sort of agree that, yes, now we both sides know about this ID and what the proper mapping is, right?
It is the setup is between, as I said, it's a two-layer thing. There's a system-to-system link, which is almost implied, right? These are fixed. This is what you do with MTLS links, and you're just putting the talking system to system stuff. But so the mechanism here is really for how to tunnel back up from that system level back into a particular tenant.
Right.
That's what this mechanism specifically does. So how does if Azure has a big pipe to go and pump data into IBM Cloud, then how does IBM Cloud resolve that event stream into their respective tenants?
Right. Okay.
And how is this granted? How is access granted? So if Azure says then, hey, I basically our customer would say, I have an IBM account, and that IBM account, in that IBM account, I want to see events now, right? So how do we create that link? Well, they're going to come to us and say, hey, I have this cookie. This is this handle effectively from my IBM scope. Please go and walk over to IBM and say, I want to have a bridge. And then we're going to go and call the IBM system through our established trust and say, hey, this customer here wants to have a bridge. And then you're going to go and create whatever is needed to create as a bridgehead into their system. And then they will go and look at the subscription on the tenant on your side and say, yes, this is right. I created this, I'm going to accept this. And now you created effectively a channel from the base level of the IBM on the fabric level up into that subscription, and we can stash events into that fabric level, and then the events come out at the tenant level.
Right. Okay.
That is what that's for.
So I think it'd be useful if, as I was saying earlier, if you get a little bit more specific in terms of exactly what you'd like for us to produce as on the output here, right? A new spec, a new attribute, whatever it may be, precisely what it's going to be in the scope of what would be in that new spec if it is a specification, just so everybody is perfectly clear in terms of what they're signing up for if we decide to take on this piece of work.
Yeah, it's an API. And so I have this kind of this create tenant channel thing, and then it's a transport. Those are transport headers. So I'll make them more concrete, probably in the issue before we're going to write the spec for it.
Yep. Yeah, I think that sounds great. Okay, we're way over time. I apologize, but any last questions for Clemens for clarity's sake?
I still don't get it, to be honest.
Well,
it's fine.
Yeah, but we can talk about this again in the issue and further calls. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. In that case, I think I got everybody on the attendee list, so I think we are done for the day in the call. So thank you all very much. There's nothing new on the SDK agenda doc, so we're going to cancel that call. So I think we're all done for the complete set of calls for today.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks, Clemens, for spending the time talking to us about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.